Go.Compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. At Go.Compare, we are pleased to be partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign, recognising the individuals who are going the extra mile at grassroots rugby clubs across Great Britain. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to nominate a grassroots hero who could win £5,000 for their club, as well as hints and tips from our insurance experts at Go.Compare.
Hello everyone, lovely to have you back with us for the latest episode of the Telegraph Rugby podcast after an incredibly busy weekend. A clean sweep for the Southern Hemisphere, and there were upsets in Dublin and also a bit of an upset at Twickenham as well. As you might expect, loads for us to get through, but we're going to do our very best to do it as thoroughly as possible. It's the usual suspects. I'm Ben Coles, he's Charlie Morgan.
Colesy.
He's Charles Richardson.
Hello everybody.
Boys, I'm not there in the studio with you, so I hope you're coping okay. You all right?
Yeah, we've got a Colesy-shaped hole here.
As you just said offline, seems like we've had a row. But we haven't.
It does look like we've had a row. We need a hologram.
Colesy, to pick you up, mate, clean sweep for the Southern Hemisphere, only the Rugby Championship sides.
Well, listen.
Spain won.
Did they? Sorry. I thought this was going to be a point about... That is a very good point. Sorry. Apologies to the Kingdom of Spain. That's not very good of us to forget them. Could I ask you for a favourite moment? Charlie, is it Spain winning? Is that your favourite moment?
No.
Mine's Hong Kong beating Brazil.
That was horrible. That was virtue signalling for me as well. I'm sorry about that. My favourite moment was Villy Leroux's chip pass to Makazole and Mapimpi. I don't think I've seen much like that on a rugby pitch before, because Mapimpi started inside the right hand post. He was sort of arcing around. It's like a lofted through ball in football, and it was just beautiful identification of space, beautiful execution, and sort of you were there, Ben. Springboks were probably below par and had to rely on the scrum to sort of get over the line, rely heavily on the scrum, but that was just a moment of utter class from Leroux.
Yeah, that was their best bit of attack, in that it was a lovely kind of design, set play, go right off a couple of phases and then come back. And yeah, it just made it look so casual, didn't he? Just the kind of...
Gorgeous.
So relaxed as he did it. Charles, what about you? Who's your favourite moment?
I'm going to go with just the Wallaby pack, which I know is very generic and a bit of a cop-out, but I was really impressed by them en masse. This sounds disrespectful, but probably a little bit surprised by them and how well they did and how much they fronted up against England, which obviously we'll come on to in a minute. But I was, really, really impressed by them.
Jeremy Williams and
Angus Bell both given 9 out of 10 player ratings, both utterly brilliant.
Were they top?
They were top. Sua'ali'i was 8 out of 10. And I gave all the forwards except for probably their only world class one going into Saturday. We would have said Taniela Tupou, who had a bit of a bad day at the office really, and they still won. But he'll be back.
Yeah, nice. I'll go for Matthew Carley getting knocked over in the Italy-Argentina game on Saturday, where... Go on, Charles.
Yeah, and he went upstairs, didn't he?
That was it, yeah. Going for it was the little doing the TMO sign and then sort of smiling. No, don't be silly.
Oh, it was a banter.
It was a banter.
Oh, okay.
He did a banter.
It was a banter.
Yeah.
It really.
And it did work.
It was exactly what I hoped he would do in that situation after getting knocked over as a referee. Just a little fake TMO dummy. And yeah, he delivered. So that was quite nice. Listen, this game at Twickenham, so much to unpack. I think we just get straight into that section and do it. Agreed?
Agreed.
Right, lads. England 37, Australia 42. Now, I'm going to safely say that none of us predicted that scoreline before the game when we were making our predictions last week.
As was committed to print. Thanks.
As was committed to print. That's the best thing about it, isn't it? It's always there for anybody to look up later. An astonishing game. You were both there. A massive result for Australian rugby, for Australia, for the Lions. And we're going to get into that in a bit because I feel like we do really need to talk about it. But first, England. They've done it again, Charlie. They've lost another game in the final stages. How do we keep on ending up here?
Good question. The one that probably Steve Borthwick is just bemused by, actually his post-match presser was, I thought one of the kind of most forthright he's been. Again, I think we mentioned that last week, but so this clip came out with about from the changing room in the New Zealand game, where he said it was a kind of odd tone, I thought, because he was saying, "Oh, well done, lads, you gave the All Blacks a fright," and that was to me quite odd because the All Blacks side they'd gone really close to in 2 tests in New Zealand before and should have won that first game at Twickenham, I thought. After this game, he went in on the England errors, and I can see why, because it's quite hard to legislate for some of the things that are going on as a coach. So just to put some meat on the bones of that, 15-3 up, and they've scored 2 fairly neat tries. Twickenham's sort of buoyant, and then they just go error after error, compounding things and inviting pressure on top of themselves. And what I mean by that, so they're 15-3 up and they have a line-out strike. Ellis Genge is in midfield and throws a no-look pass that Benel doesn't get near. Sua'ali'i picks it up, offloads to Andrew Kellaway, I think it is, and England don't touch the ball again until they're 15-10 down. Then we have the scrum is again an issue for them. They concede a scrum free kick, turn off a bit. Rob Vellatini takes a quick tap, gets 12 metres, is allowed to carry 12 metres, and England don't touch the ball again until Harry Wilson scored. Kickoff, scrum to the Wallabies, another scrum free kick conceded by England, high ball, Cunningham South done for escorting. England don't touch the ball again until Australia are ahead at half time. And then they're in a bit of and then there's this neurosis that comes on early in the second half that they actually do well to come out of England and get back ahead. England actually score points in the last half hour, which is what they have failed to do in the last sort of 3 tests before that, and they're ahead. They lose the restart, an area that Sua'ali'i was amazing at. I think he got back 4. And then there's a defensive lapse at the end that sort of seals the game. Why it's happening? I think it's still a green side that are learning in Test rugby, and we hate hearing that excuse, but it's true. And then there's certainly indecision in defence. To concede 42 points at home is pretty galling.
There's been a lot of criticism of the defensive system, hasn't there? And I'm not saying that's not valid, but also during that period over half time that you've just mentioned, the 5 minutes before, the 5 minutes after, they really lacked intensity, didn't they? Like you remember those. Tate McDermott came on for Jake Gordon for that blood bin, and he was sniping. The Wallaby forwards were carrying. Tom Curry's being bundled over by Angus Bell. When have we ever seen that before? And it was all just they got dominated physically. I mean, you can put in whatever system you like. You've got to make your shots, and you've got to, impose yourself physically on the opposition defensively. And if you're blitzing or if you're drifting, it doesn't really matter. You've still got to do it.
Completely. I think one thing to maybe, I know England supporters are fed up of excuses, but one thing that is probably worth highlighting: Manny Feoboso on and off with a HIA, Ollie Lawrence on and off with a HIA, Tom Curry obviously withdrawn permanently. That led to a sense of confusion, indecision, and I totally agree that the intensity was missing. I actually thought also that Tom Curry's injury highlighted maybe a lack of balance in the 23, and more specifically the forwards in that 23, because all of a sudden you've got Alex Dombrant having to go an hour, you've got Chandler Cunningham South having to go 80, which he is not used to doing. And I think all of that made for just I've heard, I think it's Chris Jones, BBC, described the performance as scatty, and that's bang on for me. Just as kind of a scatty performance.
But would you use that word also for the selection almost, because it's very un-Borthwick to have somebody on the bench, Alex Dombrant, who can only cover one position, and when he comes on, he has to play number 8, and immediately the entire back row has to rejig. But Ben Earl has to go to 7, Dombrant has to go 8, and then all of a sudden you've got a completely different back row there.
I found the back 5 selection, maybe more so back row, but also back 5, quite curious over the course of the autumn. I think it has been badly affected by Ollie Chesham's injury, but Sam Underhill's continued absences I've found quite curious. Tom Curry coming straight back in, although sort of we saw him, he was to the fore in that first quarter and those attacking flashes. And it's an area of the back 5 that they have got to get right this weekend, because if they don't, that could be very messy.
And with the defence, Charles has mentioned it there. I think the reason that there's so much criticism there is because of 42 points, 35 missed tackles, which is pretty high. I think it was up near the 30 mark after around about 50, 55 minutes or so, just with the way England were defending. Charlie, is there a bit of confusion in this kind of transition to the Joa'ali'i defence? Does he want to keep the blitz that was put in by Felix Jones, or does he want to move away from it? Because it seems at times as though England are kind of caught between two stools a little bit, and you have some players kind of sort of rushing out to blitz, just kind of maybe not fully aware of the situation around them. I'm thinking of that final try where if England drift and the space isn't necessarily there out wide for it. What do you think is going on there?
A few things here. I think the balance of the Australia pack, I'll say it again, looked very good, and they looked really comfortable on the ball, but the carrying that they had, so Valentini and Wilson in the back row, those two dovetailing well, and then you've got Angus Bell, just taking names, that is going to compromise any defensive system for a start, and sometimes it is unfair to just look at the scoring phase of a try, but if we do that for both the first try, where Sua'ali'i flicks an amazing pass away, and then for the last try where there is again another fantastic offload from Ikitau to Jorgensen, the connection that England have between their wing and their fullback, and they're different players, it's Slightholme on both occasions on the wing, but the connection that he has first with Furbank for the first try, when Furbank comes in and doesn't quite trust him and bites onto Sua'ali'i, so there's two players biting in on Sua'ali'i, and then the second try where it's actually Marcus Smith doesn't Mark Smith is cramping, I think, at this point, so maybe slightly unfair, and he is in an unfamiliar position, but doesn't shut the door outside of Slightholme very quickly, and then Slightholme drifts, and again Smith's shoulders turn in, and it's basically they hand that overlap to Australia. That is where you're maybe seeing a little bit of a lack of conviction in the system, and one thing that this blitz absolutely needs is conviction. Now, whether it's because Felix Jones isn't there, who is an expert in it and is able to sort of identify these little faults and just be totally clear in the week about what people's roles are, maybe that's an issue. But I think it sort of goes back to source, which is exactly the point that Charles made, is that Australia were comfortable in possession and comfortable and sort of prolific with punching holes as well.
But is it not a decision-making thing? You know, it's fine to employ a blitz, but when you're on your own line and you've numbered up, there is no need for Furbank to bite in. It happened against New Zealand as well. Surely you just have to number up there, regardless of what system you're employing. You're on your own line. Okay, I'm all for being aggressive and you know, getting in the opposition's face and stifling them, strangulating them. But you're defending on your own line. You know you've got a baller opposite you at 13. Surely you just have to number up at that point, mark your man and make your tackles, rather than trying on your own line to bite in and force a turnover. I can understand it a little bit more with Smith in the final play. Admittedly, there was more at stake and they didn't get it right, but surely that is just a decision-making issue on your own line to bite in like that.
You'd hope that they'd be adaptable in the moment as well, and I think the best defences are, but also, having said that, what the South Africa, the blitz defence is what's held up as the kind of best example of it. What they'll always have players swimming underneath that initial front line. So and you could see right at the end, I think it was Cowan Dickey, just not having the legs to get around underneath it at the end. And again, really difficult to really interrogate that scoring phase. But it certainly looks as a whole as though England are just uncomfortable without the ball.
And the reason why we are interrogating this, of course, is because, okay, I'm sure everyone's listening at home going, England's attack was no great shakes either. We had first phase issues. We had Andrew Kellaway scoring a 50-metre runaway try from a broken down first phase move. But at the same time, they scored 37 points at home in a test match and still lost. They scored 5 tries, 37 points. So, okay, the attack was frustrating at times, but they've conceded 42 here. They've conceded 42 points at home in a test match, a record number of points conceded at Twickenham, and that's the area that needs tightening up.
Is that in England-Australia games, Charles? Is that I'm guessing that's the most
conceded more in France, right?
Sorry, in England against Australia, yes.
Yeah, and the reason I think what's been quite interesting sort of post-match are the comments that have come out of England, out of the camp. You had Jamie George saying it was unforgivable to concede 42 points at home. You had Steve Borthwick saying that they deviated away from the game plan during that first half period after they built up the big lead. What do you make of those kind of those kind of comments, Charles. What do you think about that?
Well, they did start strongly. They really did, and that first try was more than neat. Arguably, it was actually very impressive. You had Genge, Jamie George offloading, combining really well. The quick tap penalty, it was full of intent and energy and dynamism, and I think they did take the foot off the gas after 20 minutes. And really, I'm not sure that we can explain why that is. I think that's a question that has to be answered inside the squad. Have they got the right leadership? Have they got the right selection? Is Jamie George the right captain? He's clearly very popular among the squad. And I don't doubt it, and he's clearly a very sort of affable, gregarious character. Is he the inspirational captain that this quite green England team needs? I'm not sure. I'm not saying he's not, but at the minute something isn't right, and it's difficult to put your finger on exactly what the issue is. Is he the best hooker in England at the minute? Again, I think there's question marks around that. Is he offering what he once did? I'm not sure. But is there anybody who's absolutely better? Again, not sure. Hooker's a bit of a problem position. But one thing I would say is that they are lacking, certainly, that in terms of dynamism and in terms of what Australia brought, they are lacking they are lacking heavy-duty ballast ball carriers. That's it, across the board, from 1 to 15, from 1 to 23.
You've been consistent on that.
I have been consistent on that, and it remains an issue. I mean, I said to you on Saturday in the press box, I said I'd love to see Tom Willis in this team. I don't think it'll happen now, and I think for this autumn campaign, that ship probably has sailed. I don't think I'd pick him against South Africa because you're sort of chucking him in at the deep end, as it were. But they really do. I mean, it was evidenced as well. We've touched on it when Alex Dombrandt came on, and you're thinking, okay, you've brought on a number 8 here, but he's not a number 8 for the tight spaces. He's not going to make you yards against the opposition back row around the ruck, and there aren't that many players in the England side who do that. Ollie Lawrence doesn't really do that. I know he's big and he's strong, but when he runs directly at an opposite man, he gets stopped. He needs to be in the wide channels. Chandler Cunningham South is similar. Ben Earl is similar. Maro Itoje even is similar. So I'm just wondering whether Luke Cowan-Dickey starting against South Africa might be a bit of an answer here, because he's a little bit more direct. He can give you a little bit more around the ruck, tie in a few forwards, tie in a bit of the opposition back row. Look, I don't think him coming into the squad is going to cure all of England's ills, but there is they lack direct, close to the ruck ball carriers. George Martin didn't punch as much as his 2 opposite numbers on Saturday.
Jamie George coming off the bench against South Africa, it doesn't necessarily cure a big problem, but it puts England in a better position to not slump at the scrum late on.
And you've got, if he is regarded internally as this all singing all dancing leader, then you've got your leader coming on to close out the game rather than taking him off after 50, 55 minutes or 60 minutes or however much.
But you're raising a bigger point there, Charles, which is then that you have to have a new England captain against South Africa.
Yeah,
which is a whole new kind of storm around the camp and around the squad that I would imagine is the absolute. I'm not necessarily saying you're wrong, but I can't imagine anything that Steve Borthwick would want less than having a kind of narrative this week of us all talking about, oh look,
looks like panic.
He's moved on to a new England captain after losing 5 out of the last 6 tests by narrow margins.
No, precisely. And we were just chatting before we began about how probably in an ideal world you might reset the whole thing, rip it up and start again after how the last 2 tests have gone. But actually, with what's coming on Saturday, I'm not sure that's the answer either. I think if they were playing Japan on Saturday, he might be a bit more tempted to just sort of say, okay, these bits aren't working, I want to change them. And they might be quite wholesale changes, or at least quite significant changes, even if there aren't that many changes. But I think with South Africa coming, I'm not sure you can do that.
We've said this all along, that Steve Borthwick had 2 ways to go after the last World Cup, which was, for want of a sort of less rubbish way of putting it, evolution or revolution. He opted for evolution, which he did by keeping guys like Dan Cole, George Ford, brought back Henry Slade, he's got. I'm finding it difficult to say that England have a lack of leaders when they've got guys who've been around enough guys who've been around for 3 World Cup cycles and are on their 4th. But what that did was lessen the scope to sort of forgive losses, and losses are happening and they are happening because of these quite naive patches in games. And the problem that Steve Borthwick has is that he doesn't have this thing to point to where he's going, well, it's total revolution, so obviously we're bedding this in, and we're going to be gradual with how this happens. And that's why, and Ollie Brown wrote a strong piece after the game, but I think his point that this kind of bubble of ill feeling is sort of growing, I think is spot on. I think that's part of the reason.
The strain on that poor Ireland win, Charlie. We mentioned it before the start of the autumn, but the Ireland win is doing so much heavy lifting at the moment. Right, before we move on, let's talk about Australia, because I really want to make sure that we give plenty of good time towards this. Charles, I think you've referenced the final try already and kind of England's shortcomings, but actually there's so much great Australian skill in that try, isn't there? Because when you watch it back and slow it down, the degree of skill for those tip-on passes and to get the space out wide to Max Jorgensen is just that's fantastic. That's kind of there's a bit of an Australian identity to that way of playing as well. I think that's fair to say. I think that's the kind of rugby that we hear a lot that Australia want to see. Just tell me about everything that really impressed you about the way they played.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's that willingness to keep the ball alive and the daring, the audacity of it in the 82nd minute to play like that and to stick to your conviction, to stick to your guns and play in that manner was what was most impressive. It's one thing doing it, but to actually have the bravery to do it at that time was sensational. I think that is the way that Australia have traditionally played rugby, and it is great to see them playing like that. And I think with the resources at their disposal, i.e. the talent pool isn't necessarily what it once was, I think they have to play like that, really. They have to play to their strengths. They have to play zippy. They have to play quick. They have to catch teams off guard. We would have said all this last week, but then actually out of nowhere, again, it sounds a little bit disrespectful, but on Saturday I don't think many people were expecting the Australian pack to do a number on the English pack. They very much did. I think to a man, up front to a man, they maybe other than Taniela Tupou, bless him, they were superior to England. I think in the backs they were as well, really. Maybe Marcus Smith shaded Noah Lolesio, but even then the Wallaby 10 was perfectly solid and perfectly respectable and really controlled things nicely. The thing that was most stark is that Australia 1-15, 1-23, whichever way you want to put it, looked just way more comfortable on the ball. Way better footballers, far better footballers across the board than England. And I don't think this is a coaching thing. I don't think it's even a player thing. I think it's a culture, a sporting culture of the two respective countries. Most of that Australia team will have grown up playing potentially rugby league and rugby union, cricket, tons of sports. Whereas in England, football is the dominant sport, which is not as much using your hands. It's football, and I think that is a cultural thing whereby the Australian team looked more comfortable on the ball instinctively, innately. From certainly the pack looked far more comfortable on the ball 1-8 than the England pack. I mean, in that England pack, how many actual ball players, who's picking a pass from 1-8 in that England team there? Not very many. I mean, we saw Ellis Genge completely fudge it at one point on Saturday to Alex Dombrent, and there aren't that many ball players, the balance of the pack. So I'm here bemoaning the lack of ball players, I'm here bemoaning the lack of sort of tight runners. So there isn't a good balance to this pack, whereas the Australian pack might have been on paper inferior to England, but actually it looked way more balanced, way more effective. They were all able to play with the ball, but also do the sort of the thankless tasks, the hard work, the unseen work. And that's why they won at the end of the day, is because they were able to keep the ball alive. They were able to find these passes, pick these passes, and at the end it told. And to be honest, for that final try, England were chasing shadows a little bit.
Lenny Kittel with the odd flick out the back for the final pass as well. I don't want to forget him. Charlie, what was your tweet on Sunday about Australia and next year's Lions tour?
Oh, it was after I sort of gambled to get the most exposure because I'm, pathetic like that. No, it was after Wales had lost to Fiji, and it was because we've had this chat haven't we? That are the Wallabies going to be good enough to sustain this Lions tour next year? And isn't it just going to be an absolute walkover and 3-0? And a couple of results we haven't mentioned: Ireland losing to New Zealand on Friday night, which actually initially I thought that would be quite good for England's narrative, and it would be sort of England have actually gone toe to toe with an All Black side that is a coming force, but obviously wasn't to be. But with that result, and maybe Ireland certainly looking inaccurate and maybe looking a bit jaded as far as sort of the age profile of their squad, not to sort of make massive overreactions on the basis of one game. But with that result, with England's result, obviously, and with Wales' result, are the Lions going to be good enough to sustain the challenge for the Wallabies? And then Scotland actually were fantastic, I thought, for long periods, as we'll get onto before fading away. But the Lions are going to be fine, but also Australia are going to be fine, I think, in that series. And we haven't mentioned him yet, Joe Schmidt. Just as far as a coach who can make a side as close as possible to the sum of its parts, fantastic. And the way he got Sua'ali'i after restarts, I thought, was just an absolute prime example of that.
Yeah, and we should say as well, good week. You may have seen on the Telegraph Sport website this week a quite explosive interview from Wallaby legend David Campese, and it's been a real good week and bad week for him, a real yin-yang, because he said that the Wallabies don't care. Well, it seems like they do care, but he was also bemoaning the fact that they don't play sort of attacking razzle-dazzle rugby, and they did that. So he's got to be happy with that.
While not caring.
Not caring. Yeah.
While not caring. I think the exciting thing from an Australian point of view as well is who wasn't there at Twickenham. So no Simon Karevi, no Will Skelton, who are two massive kind of players, world-class.
I'd forgotten that.
Skelton doesn't get in the side at the minute, in my view.
Yeah, but the way those two played, Frost and Williams, yeah, you've got a point. And then also the way Sua'ali'i is clearly an extraordinary talent, because to be able to do that on your test debut in what your first game as a rugby union, that's outrageous. It shouldn't be that possible, but there's a potential for other rugby league greats to sort of look at his success, look at how well it's gone, and to wonder actually if now is the time to maybe jump over to union as well if this Australia side are going to develop. So that's exciting. I mean, maybe not in time for the Lions, but with half an eye on 2027 potentially. This is why this result feels so important for Australia, and I think we've bashed England plenty there, and it is an incredibly disappointing loss. But from an Australian perspective, from a growth of the game perspective, I see a lot of positives there.
Colsey, right. Can we just confirm that you are calling Australia as winners of the 2027 Rugby World Cup?
Yeah, it's done, mate. It's done. Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to know what the bookies are offering, but maybe I
was just going to check that.
I'll wander down there after.
Well, it'll be a lot better today than it would have been on Thursday, I reckon.
Well, exactly. I mean, listen, I just think that we need a strong Australia in the game. We need prominent test nations like that.
12s. Get it down.
Are they?
Yeah.
Get it down.
Worth a tenner.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. As a proud sponsor of the WRU, we believe in the importance of grassroots rugby. That begins with the people who are going the extra mile for their local clubs, on and off the pitch. That's why we're partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign. From volunteers to groundsmen, referees to coaches, we want to celebrate the people who are really making a difference and reward them with £5,000 for their club to improve the grassroots game. If you know someone who deserves to be rewarded, we want to hear from you. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to find out more.
Okay, Scotland against South Africa. Who wants to quiz me about what I thought about it and the game? You both watched it, didn't you, at home, I think?
Yeah, we did. Colsey, tell me about Scotland's pack. Notwithstanding Scott Cummins' red card, which we'll get onto, they just look really tough, really cohesive. They'd have been helped by the Glasgow Warriors' success in the URC. What was that like to watch them go toe to toe with basically two world-class forward packs?
Yeah, they just really did. A number on them. I think the most striking element really was South Africa's line-out in the first half and how badly affected that was by how well Scotland defended that area. They really kind of disrupted just Evidence Smith in the middle of the pack. It was Franco Mostard's first game for an age, and you could tell like he was rusty, and they really targeted them in that area. I think the resilience that they showed, they've got that really physical back row of Ferguson, Dempsey, and someone else who I'm now forgetting because Jamie Ritchie came off the bench. Who's the other one in that back row? Rory Darge, who I thought was brilliant against Fiji last week as well. They've just got real athletes there who graft through work, Max Williamson came on. He's only like 22 after the Cummings end of the 20-minute red card. He was excellent. They've got great ball carriers as well, like in Schumann and Ashman. I just think it is a really good pack of forwards. Rassie Erasmus said something quite interesting afterwards. He was talking about Scotland's defence and how Scotland are really good at sort of holding up the tackler in those collisions, and not necessarily winning like those turnovers, but also just kind of draining sort of your energy if you're a ball carrier against that defence, and how that also kind of slows things down a bit. And I think that did kind of really rattle South Africa a little bit. There were patches in the first half where I thought South Africa, their heads had completely gone and they were wobbling. They were dropping balls they shouldn't do. They were just under pressure at the breakdown. Murrayfield was fantastic atmosphere, but then they still had 3 tries in the first half through those crossfield kicks to Mapimpi, and Scotland just could not at the start of the second half when it was 15-22. That was their moment, and they were cutting through, making line breaks. Hugh Jones in particular was excellent in that regard, but they would get into the South Africa 22, and it just felt too frantic, if that makes sense. It felt like when they got there, they didn't settle, kind of work their way through the phases and just try and orchestrate moments in attack like South Africa did for the Mapimpi second try that you talked about, Charlie. It just felt too busy, and I think that's what will hurt Scotland so much, is that it's another game against South Africa where they failed to get over the try line. And Rassie Erasmus actually mentioned that afterwards as a point of real pride, was the fact that he's had 2 tests now against Finn Russell in a row, and Scotland haven't scored a try, and he was really enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, and fair play to him. He should be. He absolutely should be, because it was a genuine success. And there was what happened in the 22, Colsey. There was that botched line out, wasn't there? There was a Matt Fagerson drop past. Was there another one in that second half?
Just kind of, I remember them coming down the short side one time and just flinging like over the head offloads, and the ball just going everywhere, and you were just thinking, just settle a bit and just think about this a bit more thoroughly. It just all felt far too chaotic. I do think Gregor Townsend said afterwards that it was one of their best performances in recent years, and he has a point. And I think the scoreline is sort of skewing maybe how I feel about the game, because it certainly didn't feel like South Africa had swept them aside with a 17-point lead. But when you can bring on all those replacement forwards, if you then don't have the firepower in your scrum to match them late in the game, which was kind of the pre-match worry that Scotland didn't have that, and so it proved, then you're going to be in trouble. And South Africa reeled off 3 scrum penalties in a row, and then the 4th scrum later on was a pushover for Jasper Wiese, and that was what separated them.
Yeah, well,
and
I think the starker picture almost is I know the 7-1 gets all the headlines, South Africa's 7-1, but I think the starker picture is probably Scotland's depth. In Scotland's bench is probably where the spotlight should be, because I think that Scotland starting 15 went toe-to-toe with South Africa, really. And you talk about the pack, Colsey, and Schumann was quality, Fagerson quality, the second rows, okay, Cummings, but then Williamson came on and looked to the manor born, really, and was really putting himself about. Darge, Dempsey, Fagerson, they all sort of led a really strong physical effort. Ewan Ashman put a massive shot in on Ebenezer. The problem was that there seems to be, and this has been a problem for Scotland for some time now, a massive drop-off between the starting team, particularly up front, and those who were coming on. And that's what told in the end. I mean, when at sort of the 60-minute mark, when the starting Scottish front row left, the game was still in the balance, and yet the scoreline looks like a comprehensive South African victory.
I just think if you're Scotland, I get that you will be encouraged by aspects of that game and how well you fronted up, but I think there should also be real disappointment. I don't think they should be settling on, oh yeah, we pushed them really close and the scoreline isn't a fair reflection. I would be more coming away from that thinking we've really blown an opportunity there at 15-22 when we were carving through line breaks and South Africa were off their best. We've really missed a moment there. I think that would be my gut feeling. But yeah, and we need to talk about the red card as well. So Scott Cummings and Rory Darge go in to clear out Franco Mostert. Cummings ends up landing on Mostert's kind of lower limb, and Christoph Ridley says yellow card, high level of danger, it's off to the bunker, and then it's upgraded to a red. Now, I can see why they got to that decision, but it's not really a crock roll. and I mean, maybe one of you can correct me here, it's more that he's sort of fallen awkwardly and ended up on his lower limb. And actually, Charlie, I think you tweeted out that initially you thought it was Rory Darge who was going to get done for that, and Gregor Townsend actually said the same afterwards.
So the croc roll, Darge's actions were more consistent with a classic croc roll because he's gone high on the clear out of Mostert and then sort of rolled down, and some of his weight has gone on the outside of Mostert's left leg, I think. And then it was called in initially, I think, by in Tempest, TMO had alerted Christoph Ridley to it, and then the second, the sort of reverse angle shows Cummins kind of again falling on Mostert's right limb, and that was what was deemed to be a red card, 20-minute red card. I thought that was tough. I think Rory Lawson said it on the TNT Sports comms that actually it just looked like they'd missed the clear out and then were trying to sort of wrestle Mostert away from the ball. It's so tricky, this area, because those clear outs are just such a moving situation where a lot of the time you are trying to get a player off the ball who was initially illegal in the first place. Mostert, I don't think, was in this case. And to me, it was an example of... So unintended consequences is this phrase that rugby union fans are just getting used to because the amount of law changes that are happening and what the sort of the unintended sort of knock-on effects are. And the 20-minute red, it was to me an example of a 20-minute red card being used instead of a yellow because it's actually a buffer for a referee a little bit to sort of send the player off where it's something maybe slightly more dangerous than a regular yellow card, but isn't a full red. And Semi Randrandra's high tackle on Cameron Winnett in the Fiji Wales game was a sort of even more kind of stark example of that. I think it's so tough for players, so tough on Cummins because, well, I think he'll be in the Lions mix. He's an excellent player, and I did think it compromised Scotland a bit.
And we know that referees have been told to keep an eye out, to be on high alert for these croc rolls ahead of the autumn. It's not been a change of interpretation like the escort stuff that we'll come on to later, but we know they're on high alert for them. I think once they decided that it was a croc roll, and I think that's the key bit of interpretation. I think once they decided that it was a croc roll, I think it was inevitable that it was going to be a 20-minute red just because of the crackdown. I'm not sure whether it was. It certainly wasn't your traditional croc roll. Did he fall on the lower limbs of the player, in inverted commas? I think he did, but was it accidental? It looked like it might have been, really, and I think Scotland can feel a little bit hard done by. But if they've come together and the four officials and they've decided that it's a croc roll, then I think it has to be a 20-minute red.
Someone had to go, whether it was Darge or Cummins at that point.
Yeah, and surely I appreciate Townsend's point about mistaken identity, but maybe would you rather lose a second row or your open side? I don't know. He might say second row because it compromises your line out, but
that phrase just
must be
reminds
50-50.
That phrase just reminds me of Doddy Weir on the Lions documentary.
Identity. It does. Lads, let's jump to Dublin on Friday night. Charles, I think you had the closest eye on New Zealand Ireland, the end of Ireland's very, very long unbeaten run at home, and a very impressive performance from the All Blacks after that short turnaround against England. What would you pin this down to? Just a lot of Irish mistakes and not a lot of kind of Irish accuracy in key areas like we're used to. How much do we read into this?
I mean, to be honest, I think to come to real sort of damning judgment after one game against the second best team in the world could be a little bit hyperbolic and a little bit harsh. But that was not the Ireland that we've grown to know.
I thought you were going to say, but I'm going to do it anyway.
We're going to do it anyway. New Zealand were excellent. Ireland were uncharacteristically sloppy. It was their first game. New Zealand have been playing together for the entire summer and played England at Twickenham and beat them last week. We said last week on the podcast that I said last week that I think New Zealand are a rising force rather than a fading one in this 4-year cycle under Scott Robertson. We, I believe, en masse think that they've been a little bit unfairly maligned, or certainly I've got that sort of feeling from you. And they were very, very good on Friday night. And I think Ireland were sloppy, yes. They were untidy. They were making uncharacteristic errors. But I think a lot of those were... They are not unenforced. And Andy Farrell admitted as much after the game. He said that New Zealand played very, very well, and I don't wish to take anything from them. He said that wasn't us, but he admitted that New Zealand played far better. And if you're in a two-horse race and the other horse is way better, then you're going to be struggling. I don't think it's a terminal thing for Ireland. I'm saying that, but if they don't go well for the rest of the autumn, then questions will be asked. But surely with the class that they've got and the players at their disposal, this isn't a sort of chuck the baby out with the bathwater sort of scenario.
Where New Zealand have got such solid foundations, their maul defence was phenomenal, and that took away an area that's been sort of maybe subtly very, very important for Ireland over the course of their recent success. And the scrum is, as we've seen from those England tests, hugely strong area. So Jason Ryan is doing an awesome job with those All Blacks forwards.
And a massively underrated element of New Zealand at the minute, I would say, is their midfield defence. I think Rieko Ioane and Geordie Barrett are defending exceptionally well. They did so against Bundy Aki and Gary Ringrose, and against Henry Slade and Ollie Lawrence. And against New Zealand, Slade and Lawrence were, they were fine, they were solid, but they got nowhere against those two. And I know everyone talks about the Barretts attacking and Rieko Ioane's dynamism and his speed and his abilities in open spaces, but actually I think they're defending unbelievably well as a midfield pairing at the minute, and not blitzing.
Just a quick thank you to Rieko Ioane for doubling down after the game, and also for leading the haka before it. I think that was very welcome spice, which I'm all for. I think we always need plenty of stuff like that to dig into. And if you didn't see after the win on Friday, he posted on Instagram a photo with the caption, "Put that in your book," which was a lovely little nod to his spat with Johnny Sexton after the Rugby World Cup. So no, I was all for it. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Ireland against Argentina now feels quite fun on Friday night coming. I think that's a game that we'll be very interested in after Argentina's win over Italy. And
they put 50 on them. That's a
pumping. Yeah. I watched it back this morning. A lot of kind of Italian errors being pounced upon by Argentina and just scoring amazing counter-attack tries. I think the way Rodrigo Iscaro has been playing, particularly the last week for Quins and now for Argentina, has been exceptional as well. Yeah, they're just going really, really well. And finally, Wales. First ever loss at home to Fiji earlier on Sunday. And I mean, this was... we're wondering, I think, where the bottom is with Wales a little bit, aren't we, Charlie? This is another really, really tough moment.
We are. It's not something that had a bearing on the game. Well, the replacement probably did have a little bit of a bearing on the game and sort of clouded the clarity that Wales had in their back line. But Sam Costello coming on instead of Ellis Bevan for Mason Grady, that's inexcusable, isn't it? That sort of breakdown in communications. You're surely going to have your scenarios mapped out before a game. Now, we can argue that Sam Costello in the 23 shirt was a bit of an odd kind of call in the first place because Ben Thomas can cover 10 and has started there in Test matches. Can
you ever remember this happening ever to any team? Because I've been racking my brains.
I'm sure it has, but at
Test level, I mean.
Yeah, it's just village, isn't it?
Not at Test level. A quick nod to Matt Southcombe at ITV Wales, who kind of followed up on that in the press conference, and one of the better, just to clarify, questions, which I think we've heard for a while when he was trying to work out.
Yeah, it really was.
I think the most alarming.
Said.
I think the most alarming thing about the entire result is that when it happened, I wasn't even shocked. Like I sort of thought Fiji would win. And I was just sort of like, oh yeah. Wales, I didn't even realise that it was Wales' first home loss to Fiji. I sort of was going into that thinking, yeah, I mean, Fiji are favourites here for me. And then Wales lost at home to Fiji for the first time, their 10th consecutive defeat. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, I mean, I sort of saw that coming, really. I know it was close, and I know actually Wales did do some bright things with the ball, and some of the defence was good. But I was just sort of like, yeah.
What I will say, Wales were competent for the first 20 minutes, better than competent. They scored a really, really nice try through Blair Murray. That pullback from Ben Thomas to an arcing Mason Grady is just really nice, clever, attack. I think it's a wide. Ben Thomas gets pushed by a really nice pass from Gareth Anscombe. Classy moments from Thomas Williams throughout. The Maul looked pretty dangerous, but just is this almost a similar thing to England, where they're not making pay a lot of the good areas that they have in the game. I know right at the start they had that long passage of possession in the Fiji 22 and end up coughing it up. But you wonder where they're gonna how they're gonna haul themselves out of this hole. Really, it's pretty bleak stuff.
Okay, questions time. Thank you for sending many of them in. The first one is from James Weil of Planet Rugby, and he says, should England pick French-based players? I assume we've covered this before on the podcast. Any strong thoughts from either of the two of you?
Oh, well, just very quickly, the policy should remain. I'm a fan of the policy of not picking French-based players on the whole. However, there is an exceptional circumstances clause. Jack Willis is currently tearing it up for Toulouse in the top 14. And England are struggling for flankers. You've got Ollie Chesham and Tom Curry, who are clearly the two first choice 6 and 7 out. I'm not saying that he should be parachuted in this week because he's not up to speed, but I do think that the exception... I'm not saying that pick Jack Willis and then let's pick Courtney Laws, let's pick David Ribbons, let's pick Arundel, Farrell or Sinclair, no. But what I'm saying is that if there is somebody who is an absolutely exceptional talent who is playing incredibly well, he captained Toulouse a couple of weeks ago, there is politics clearly involved here, but nobody in their right mind can say that Jack Willis should not be in that England squad for the autumn.
I am a fully paid up member of the Willis Brothers fan club. I have Tom Willis in the 23, and I really, really rate Jack. I think you've got to think about the logistics here, and he wouldn't have been available for the first game against the All Blacks. He would have been coming in on last Monday. That's very difficult. What I would say is, to add on that point that Charles has made about the exceptional circumstances, the circumstances in which he finds himself in. The reason he's in Toulouse is because Wasps went under, and I wonder whether there could have been a bit more sympathy towards that with his England situation.
Completely agreed.
I agree with you on those guys from Wasps and Irish who had to go abroad. I think as a wider point, I'm just a firm no. There's enough talent in this country, there's enough resources in this country to develop a world-class team, and to just sort of lean on some players being over in France because they've had great offers to go there. I think it's a bit of a crutch. I don't think that they should be selected. I think next question is from Adam. It's a two-parter. First one, are England missing leaders? No Farrell, no Laws, May, Sua'ali'i, Vunipolas, Youngs. We've kind of... I think we touched on this earlier because there are players out there with plenty of caps in terms of George and Itoje and George Ford when he comes on. But are they maybe missing... not a nasty leader as such, but you know what I mean? Someone to kind of really get stuck into them when the chips are down. Yeah,
inspirational maybe is the word. I mean, do they have an inspirational leader in the team who isn't currently captain? Marrow on his day maybe, but is he there? If you do, I mean, I've just spoken about how I don't think Jamie George is the right captain, just to answer your question, Adam. But then the flip side of that is, and I'm well aware, who's replacing him? And at the minute, I think you've got a point. I think they are missing a little bit of leadership, and there is no outstanding candidate to replace Jamie George at the minute. Marrow was always the man, wasn't he? But is he playing like an England captain at the minute? Is he giving off the aura of an England captain? I'm not necessarily sure.
There are enough experienced players. It is a young side in some respects, and there are guys like Manifeo Boso, Tommy Freeman, Chandler Cunningham-South, who are clearly learning on the job a little bit as test players. Maybe you could widen that net to include somebody like George Furbank, certainly maybe Ben Spencer. But they've been around the game a lot, and I think maybe it's on these players a bit more to sort of be more assertive. I'm finding that a kind of tricky excuse to swallow, to be honest.
Yeah, same. Yeah, because also, what's your threshold for an experienced player?
Yeah,
are we talking 20 caps? Are we talking 30? I don't know.
Ben, the next sort of bracket down from your veterans, so like your so George Ford, Dan Cole, this bracket of players that England actually don't maybe have a lot of, but Marcus Smith, Ben Earl, maybe someone like Freddie Stewart, who obviously isn't around. Is in the squad, but not starting yet. We're going to get to that. So yeah, that's where it's tricky. Do those players need to be more assertive? I don't think Marcus Smith could have done much more to be a leader on the weekend. I thought he was, through his actions, pretty a catalyst for England. Ben Earl has been in the past. Maybe has been slightly subdued the last 2 games by his high standards.
And Tom Curry's been spoken about and did captain England in the Calcutta Cup, but then you can't string 2 or 3 games.
Ellis Genge has captained the side to a Premiership title.
Yep.
So they are there.
Yeah.
It's just whether it's working. Question from Tom: is Borthwick a Southgate 2.0? A very respected ex-player who, by all intents and purposes, seems to be a hard-working coach, but has been fast-tracked into a position he doesn't have adequate coaching experience for. I would immediately counter that by saying that Borthwick did win the Premiership title with Leicester right before he took the England job. He was a very long-term assistant in Test rugby with Eddie Jones for Japan and then England, so he did have experience. It wasn't quite like Southgate, I would say. What about you two? You have a thought on that?
No, I think you've answered it, Colsey, really. Obviously, there is the element of they're not the sort of sexy names, Gareth Southgate and Steve Borthwick, but I don't necessarily think that should come into it either. I think Borthwick was absolutely the right choice when he was given the job, and for people who want him replaced, I would ask the same question as I would ask for the past 6 months, maybe even longer. Who are you replacing him with?
Yeah, that's true. Just one from Honey Badger for Charlie. You mentioned it there about Freddie Stewart. Does he sort of match South Africa more than George Furbank, who's been a little bit quiet? I think you've gone into why Furbank's been quiet, and maybe we can just do this as a broader kind of selection discussion. But starting with Stewart, is this the week to bring Stewart back in, Charlie?
Could be. I think they're going to get tested under the high ball, and with these new escorting rules, that's been a more sort of less reliable platform to get attacking sort of impetus from, which is sort of how Furbank has came into his own in that game against Ireland, and then in the first test against New Zealand. I think I'd still stick with Furbank and just kind of back a little bit more time together to for that backline to click. But there's certainly a case for Stewart to come in, and that's so interesting, isn't it? Because he came in and immediately became super important to the side, and then he seemed as though he was cast aside a little bit for Furbank, and now a directive change might make him all the more important again. Very interesting.
Charles, any changes for you?
I think I would start Luke Cowan-Dickie with Theo Dan.
And who's captain in that case?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Probably, maybe Ellis Genge and Marrow as co-captains.
That's woke nonsense.
That is woke nonsense. Yeah, but that's me bottling it basically. That's me sort of disproving my own point. But is it time to unleash Asher Opoku Forjaw?
We use unleash so much.
I honestly would be tempted. He is an incredibly strong scrummager.
Who hasn't
is that you
played
out on
a game of loose head since the world since Junior World Cup?
Since under 20s. But I mean, he is I would say on current evidence a stronger scrummager than Finn Baxter. And the scrum is going to be massive. I mean, it's massive every weekend, but it is going to be one of the major talking points this week. It's going to be the major talking point on Saturday. You need your best scrummagers in the country at the coalface with you on Saturday. I think there's a real argument to bring in Trevor Davison too.
Just on the escorting rule, because that was another question we had from Michael, just on whether it was working, and I know we had a few questions on that. There was a moment in the Scotland game in the first half, I think, where Pollard made a catch and got absolutely clattered, and Franco Mossa was penalised also for obstruction. Did you guys see that as well? I think that was in the first half, which was sort of like a bit of both in terms of everything was working against them in that moment.
Is it working? On the one hand, it's not binary. This, I don't think. On the one hand, yes, it is creating greater competition for the ball in the air, and it is making sure that the team who are receiving the ball just don't have it all their own way. On the other, I think that they are over-refereeing this a little bit en masse. I think that an attacking chaser could just run directly into a defender and they would get a penalty. That hasn't happened yet, or at least that sort of level of cynicism hasn't happened yet, but I don't think it's going to take long for teams to cotton on. I think we saw at Twickenham on Saturday, Lucan Sua'ali'i was trying to get out of the way because they've been told that they can't stand in front of a catcher. He was trying to get out the way, accidentally clears up Ollie Slightholme, who he had absolutely no idea was there. Okay, the Twickenham crowd didn't like it. It was a complete accident, and it was actually an example of him reacting to the new law directives of trying to keep that area clear where the catcher is. He accidentally takes out Ollie Slightholme, and he's still penalised. So what is he supposed to do there? Just stop existing because he can't stand in the line of the catcher. He tries to move out the way, and he clears up the England chaser. So it's just sort of like, okay, where's my invisibility cloak?
How much do you wish you'd said that to the referee in that moment? Shall I just stop existing?
Yeah. Well, he would have had a point.
He would have had a point. We've spoken. Fabian asked if we're underestimating New Zealand since Scott Robinson took charge. I don't think we are. I think what we've seen is just real development in the last two games out of the Rugby Championship in terms of I think they've just figured out their identity and their systems a little bit more. Is that fair, Charlie?
Good point from Fabian about how close they got in South Africa as well. Damien McKenzie missed a kick in the last 10 minutes or so that would have changed the complexion of that. And they had them on the ropes for large periods of that game. I think New Zealand had South Africa on the ropes for large periods of that game. One thing about New Zealand and South Africa and Australia, if you will, and to bring England into that is, okay, England have lost back-to-back tests against New Zealand and and Australia. I don't really think that makes any difference to what's going to happen on Saturday. I'm not going to say that England are going to win on Saturday against the Springboks at Twickenham, but I don't think those two results make any difference to that. In a way, I think it's almost a clean slate, and as we've seen, to be honest, England are better when they have this siege mentality backs to the wall. I used to always think there's a real cop-out when players said, if you're a little bit off in Test rugby, then sort of any result can happen and you can lose a game that you might have thought you'd win easily. But that's bang on, to be fair. And I think the next World Cup is going to be fantastic.
I hope so. I hope it's going to be wide open. And our final question from the Harlequins pod, he wants to have some Lions hot takes. So in terms of bolters, in terms of any kind of whether we'll have less Irish players, might Australia actually win the series? I mean, what are we kind of thinking about the Lions?
I mean, my hot take is that Joseph-Aukuso might go.
Might go. You've got to say he's gonna go.
Okay, right. Yeah. It's got to be hot. It's hot. It's boiling hot. He's going. There we go. Done. Get him on the plane. Book your ticket now.
Bolter would be Jamie Osborne for me, the kind of rangy Ireland centre, straight back three player. I'd love the Wallabies to win the first test, just for the intrigue around it, and I'd love Sua'ali'i to play every test in the lead up to it, so he's as familiar as possible, and the Wallabies are familiar as possible with him. And
speaking of the Lions, I have with me here, if you can see, the new jersey, which
you can see.
Ben Coles did a piece last week ranking it. What did you say about it, Mr. Coles?
So when I do those
explain
pieces,
yourself.
Explain yourself.
And podcast listeners, please go on YouTube to see Charles holding that up proudly. There
is an NFC tag at the bottom of it where if you scan your phone, apparently if you tap your phone on this, something happens to your phone. It's all a little bit over my head technologically, but if you tap your phone on this, look, this is brand new. Look, it's still got the tag on.
Listen, mate, you're the youngest on this podcast. If it's over your head,
do you two know what an NFC tag is?
Do you mean an NFT? Do you not mean NFT?
Maybe no, not a non-fungible token. Okay, I know what an NFT is.
We're letting ourselves down.
We are letting ourselves down here. Yeah.
This is the real shame of our podcast.
But you wrote. What did you write, Ben? Come on.
So it's a say what you see exercise, those articles, and I looked at it and I looked at the pattern on it, and it just reminded me of like a grandmother's curtains, like in terms of just the kind of And do you get that vibe looking at it in person?
So what
Can
I
you
would
see
say
where I'm
is,
coming from.
you were at the launch, I wasn't. I thought on the pictures the shirt looked really quite naff. I think it's 100% better in person
agree.
and in my hands
I'd agree.
than it looked on pictures. And yeah, I'm quite excited about it now.
That's good. That's good. So is that yours to keep, this shirt, or do you have to
No,
give
it's
it
the
back?
podcasts to keep. This will be up in the studio for our next episodes until the end of the autumn. Yeah,
Can take the place of the
Wait.
Wimbledon one.
and it might have to replace Wimbledon RFC.
The Wimbledon shirt has had a great run, so I'm sad in a way, but at the same time, it'll be nice.
We're
to
going
have
up in the
Lions.
world.
We are. So wait, is that my hot take about the Lions shirt?
I want a hot
Yeah,
take
your
from
hot
you.
take
I want
is
a bold.
that the Lions are going to be wearing your nan's curtains.
Gives a bolter. Colsey gives us a
Charlie
bolter.
Charlie said about 5, so I was going to say that Australia win the first test. A bolter. A bolter. On the spot as well, that is quite hard. I like the idea of Asher going. I'm trying to think of a Scot who people might not expect to go. I'm really on the Rory Darge hype train at the moment, and so if he was involved, that wouldn't shock me. Offers just tons of
Tom Jordan?
physicality, really good at the breakdown.
Any of those back
Tom
rows.
Jordan. Any
Jack
Scotland back
Dempsey,
rows, yeah.
Jack Dempsey or Matt Fagerson. Give it a rip as well.
Yeah, that would be my hot take. Either one or two of those lads will be in. And that's it. Thanks very much, lads. Thank you for listening, everybody, and appreciate that we're not all in the studio this week, but I will be back there next week with the boys. Don't worry. Where are you going to be this weekend, gents? Where are you off to?
I'm off to Paris for what could be the game of the autumn, France v New Zealand, Saturday night, late 8:10 kickoff, GMT. Really looking forward to it as ever. You don't need to invite me twice to a trip on the Eurostar over to Paris, but very much looking forward to a fixture that is steeped in history and excellence.
I'm Twickenham on Saturday and then Twickenham Stoop Sunday for England Day. I'm going to go home in between. I'm not going to hang around.
You're just going to stay in the
tent.
area. Just okay. That's good to know. I'll be at Twickenham with you, Charlie, and then I'll be at Wales, Australia on Sunday in Cardiff as well. Loads of coverage on the Telegraph website this week, as you can imagine, everybody. So please check in on that, and lots of build up to England, South Africa in particular. Got a few interesting pieces coming away around the set piece and around the coaches as well. We'll be back next week to reflect on it all. So from the three of us, thank you for listening or watching on YouTube, and until then, goodbye.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby podcast. At Go.compare, we are pleased to be partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign, recognising the individuals who are going the extra mile at grassroots rugby clubs across Great Britain. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to nominate a grassroots hero who could win £5,000 for their club, as well as hints and tips from our insurance experts at Go.compare.